you're just joining us now, welcome. Workers' World starts now.
From England to Poland, every step across the ocean, the ruling classes, them is in a mess. Oh yes, the capitalist system a regress, but the Soviet system now progress. So which one of them you think is best?
Welcome to our weekly Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Sharik Tribody. Thanks once again for having joined us. Now, gender-based violence in society has long reached crisis levels, with daily reports of women, young and old, being beaten, raped and murdered. These statistics tell the story of an unfolding horror for the majority of women in South Africa. Gender-based violence is an international phenomenon, with a scourge affecting women in the workplace too. In response, the International Labour Organization, the ILO, has adopted a Convention 190, which aims to address and eradicate all forms of GBV at the workplace. The ILO Convention No 190, or C190 for short, is the first international treaty to recognize the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. The convention was adopted in June of 2019 by the International Labour Conference of the International Labour Organization, the ILO, and came into force on the 25th of June 2021. Governments that ratify C190 will be required to put in place the necessary laws and policies and measures to prevent and address violence and harassment in the world of work. The convention represents an historic opportunity to shape the future of work based on dignity and respect for all. Before we get into our conversation, let's first bring you the insert prepared for us this week by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
On the 29th of November 2021, the Employment and Labour Minister, Thembelani Nxesi, officially handed over SA's document for registration and ratification with the International Labour Organization Convention dealing with gender-based violence and sexual harassment in the workplace. The Congress of the South African Trade Union has been at the forefront of campaigning for the ratification of the convention, as they feel that it would benefit the workers to a large degree and compel the employers to act. The Convention 190 provides the protection of workers and other persons in the world of work. Once a member signs ILO Convention 190, they commit taking appropriate measures to firstly monitor and enforce national laws and regulations regarding violence and harassment in the workplace. Secondly, to ensure easy access to appropriate and effective remedies and safe, fair and effective reporting and dispute resolution mechanisms and procedures in cases of violence and harassment in the world of work. The convention will be binding only upon those members of the International Labour Organization whose ratifications have been registered with the Director General of the International Labour Office. Representatives from COSATU affiliates say that the ratification of the Convention on Violence and Sexual Harassment will not only benefit workers and their unions, but will force employers to act.
With the National Union of Mine Workers, we've got 4 sectors that we are organizing at. That is mining, construction, energy, and the metal sector. And with these 4 sectors, it has come to our attention that gender-based violence and harassment of women at place of work is very rife. And with this convention in place, it will be able to assist the women in the working places to be able to know how to be able to report these matters and how can they be protected.
As a rectification of C190, it will help us to empower our members and our union and to protect them against anything that might happen whilst on or off duty.
According to research agency Columinate, ILO C190 is important because violence and harassment in the world of work cannot be tolerated. In 2018, they conducted a survey with 1,000 urban South Africans to investigate the extent of sexual harassment in the workplace. The research revealed that South African corporations need to improve their violence and sexual harassment policies and procedures to ensure that companies adequately protect their employees. 51% of workplaces do not have clear sexual harassment policy in place, according to the Columinate survey.
I was busy working, and there is this guy that's like he's teasing, asking questions and talking to you. It's like it's always with a touch, you know what I mean? And the specific day, I was busy making labels in the admin office, and when I came out, turned my back, and he came from behind and he touched me. You understand? I actually got upset. I'm very, very upset. He's got a reputation, and I never thought that he's going to do it to me. But jokes, and he likes to make jokes, and everybody in the shop knew about him, in the store knew about him. I didn't see him. He just came from behind, and I never liked what he did. So I approached him, and he still took it for a joke. As a woman, you can't talk to me and then with every sentence you touch, or you rub. That for me, I actually felt very uncomfortable about it.
A country that has signed C190 has an obligation to ensure enforcement and appropriate remedies. One of the interventions that COSATU says it would do is to embark on a political education campaign to ensure that its members understand the convention, take it seriously, and act.
We should not only celebrate the implementation or the signing of the convention, but we'd rather have to look into its implementation. Is it really implemented to the fullest, or is it just on paper? And make sure that our workers are being workshopped. They know exactly what the convention says, and in cases where it's not observed, what is it that they should do and say? So the interventions are more of arming the very workers themselves about the convention.
All right, thanks so very much there for having joined us. That insight, of course, putting things into a perspective for a conversation that is so terribly unfortunate, but one that we need to have about the increasing cases of gender-based violence that we are confronted with. We have Crescentia Mafokeng, the regional representative for the Building and Wood Workers International. Thank you very much for joining us. Patricia Neyman is here from Sakahu, as well as Khomotso Makupola, the Deputy Secretary on Matters of Gender for Nihawu. Thank you so very much for having joined us. Maybe I want to start off with you, Crescentia. Maybe just give us an overview and a sense of what we need to understand by gender-based violence.
Well, the issue around gender-based violence, I think, in the world of work is really a known phenomenon in our history. That workers get harassed, and workers really get brutalized in the world of work. If you take, for example, women, when they seek employment and they have to exchange something to get employment. And this is what we are talking about, that this must end. And when they are in employment, they are not given opportunities to be promoted into higher positions. And some had really faced this issue around having to exchange something to receive an opportunity to rise up the ladder. And if you look also in this current phenomenon where we have we have had also COVID-19 exacerbating the challenges that we have been having on the issues of harassment in the world of work. It's not only harassment by gender, but also harassment by being a being. Either you choose to be bisexual, you get harassed. And also the issue around COVID. COVID exacerbated violence against women and children because we had to now transport our employment into our place of stay, into our houses. And this exacerbates gender-based violence because
Yeah.
you want to work on the other hand and your partner does not want you to work.
Okay, and I just want to maybe pick up with you, Patricia Neyman, on how prevalent, how widespread gender-based violence finds itself in the workplace.
Well, this is generally known amongst researchers that gender-based violence in the workplace, it's widespread, including femicide of workers getting killed by the women members getting killed by the husbands. And obviously there is a link between the home and the workplace. And it's quite prevalent. Sexual harassment is a form of gender-based violence, and it is quite prevalent, very widespread. But and it is, as Crescentia said, it has been exacerbated by COVID-19. Whilst the economic crisis is also going on at the moment, sexual harassment and gender and other forms of gender-based violence is on the increase. I just wanted to quote, give you an indication, like in 2021, according to Stats South Africa, in its report in crimes in South Africa against women, there's an indication that 1 in 5 women are experience violence.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on those stats with you, Patricia, once I return from the break. But Khomotso, just very quickly, that's 1 in 5 women that experience gender-based violence. Do you think it's a societal issue, or does the workplace breed this problem or contribute to the problem as well?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's a societal issue, and it then goes to the workplace from where we come from or from where we live. It follows us to our workplaces, and I think that it is something that really needs to be, confronted, because it is, when you look at it, it is not just a matter that is affecting only women, but the numbers, when you look at the numbers, women are actually more affected than the other gender.
Yeah, and I think that's precisely why we are talking about it. So I want to pick up on that, and thanks very much for those opening remarks. So what exactly is ILO Convention 190, and what is it seeking to respond to? We'll pick up on that after the break.
Welcome back. Your Labour News highlights this week. Money loss leads state-owned post office to laying off workers. Tongat Hewlett has finally paid small-scale farmers. The Public Service Association embarks on a strike. Twitter has fired nearly all of its staff in Ghana, which was home to its only office in Africa. And people took part in the anti-government marches across the country. Do stay tuned later for the full bulletin. Continuing this week's topic of discussion, here's Tashreeq.
Right, thanks there to Michaela as well. We'll hear from her a bit later as well. Let me pick up on some of those stats that you raised a bit earlier, Patricia. You speak about just how dire gender-based violence is, and we have an ILO Convention 190 that's seeking to respond to it. What exactly is this convention, and how do you think it contemplates dealing with gender-based violence in the workplace?
The Convention 190 is the convention, a very comprehensive convention that seeks to prevent and eliminate violence in the world of work. It's quite comprehensive in the fact that it covers both the formal economy and the informal economy. It is also comprehensive in terms of putting violence, as previously we only had sexual harassment, it puts violence right at the center of the world of work. It includes domestic violence. It includes all forms of harassment like bullying, mobbing, cyberbullying, and also sexual harassment. So in that sense, it is quite comprehensive. And it also covers third parties as perpetrators. And it also put an obligation, more of an obligation on employers to take responsibility for a harassment-free workplace.
Yeah, and trying to understand, the framing of this discussion, Crescentia, when it comes to Convention 190. Of course, it was only adopted very recently. It took about 2 to 3 years for an official adoption after it was initially at least introduced or spoken about. What is your sense about whether a convention like this is just platitudes, or does it actually provide mechanisms to begin to actually systematically deal with gender-based violence?
Well, first of all, let me say that, as Patricia said, that this is the most important convention in the history of conventions at ILO, because really it does not put the obligation on the worker now. It really takes back this responsibility on employers as well as government. Those that have ratified this convention, we have about, I think, 6 countries in Africa that have ratified. In total, we have 20 around the world that have ratified this convention. But it actually says that put tools like put obligation on the employer to ensure that the world of work is free of violence and harassment. It ensures that also government make tools not only prevent defensive tools, but also preventative tools that could be utilized to ensure that the world of work is free of violence and harassment. Even those that are seeking employment are protected by this convention. Even those who are domestic workers are both public and private entities are protected by this convention. It's a very important tool, and it also put the obligation on government to put also legal instruments that could be utilized in the event that you get harassed. It also put the obligation on police, those who get reported to, not to harass, because sometimes you find that a victim goes to the police station to report the case, and it is the police who really exacerbate the challenge further. And those also are obliged to ensure that there is no harassment when you go to police station. So it is the whole entity. It is the only convention in the history of the ILO that is like that. And we are very grateful.
But do you think, and I just want to pick up on that with Khomotso, do you think that there is an appetite that businesses have aligned, including governments, they've aligned their workplace policies to a convention like this, that in the event gender-based violence is experienced or detected in the workplace, that there are mechanisms with which to deal with this, notwithstanding criminal charges that could be applied here? But do you think within the workplace there is a methodology on how to deal with gender-based violence as committed by the C190?
I think that since it is ratified by government, it simply tells that government departments will need to make sure that Convention 190 becomes a source of document that gets implemented within the world of work, also to assist the current policies that different government departments are actually using to make sure that we have a free gender-based workplace, because that's where most workers or ourselves, we spend most of our time at, and we need to be safe and make sure that our policies, including the very set Convention 190, becomes a tool that will make sure that we are safe within our workplace. And what is also of importance is for us to make sure that for workers and also government departments, people, we must take each and every individual for training to understand what the Convention 190 is all about, so that people are to understand exactly what it contains and what is expected of the departments in relation to the sexual harassment and gender-based violence in workplaces.
Yeah, which is very interesting. And the one question that I think, and thanks so very much for highlighting that, but the one thing that I want to pick up on is that if there is a substrata of a process to try and deal with gender-based violence in the workplace, how does one begin to deal with that when it is so prevalent in our communities? Bringing that sort of violence into our communities, and that's a conversation we're going to pick up once we do return from the break. Do stay with us. So, do conventions like this actually work? How much of it does translate into dealing with them in the workplace? And that's what I want to pick up on now with you, Patricia, because, I mean, if one looks at the farming sector, the informal sector, the domestic workers, as Crescentia had mentioned a bit earlier, the reality is that we sit with a societal issue. And I'm wondering whether a convention like this is practical for a South African context, or is gender-based violence a universal concept that we know how it operates, how it functions, and how to address it?
Let me start with the last point that you phrased about whether gender-based violence is universal. Yes, indeed. It's found all over the world. And it is what they call the dual pandemic, whilst we must acknowledge it is not a dual pandemic with COVID-19. It's a pre-existing pandemic, and it has just increased. Now, how does the convention actually assist? Well, once a convention is ratified by government is obligated to domesticate its national laws so that it can abide by the convention. And as we've mentioned, the convention is very wide-ranging. It's very comprehensive, covers all aspects that provide safety and a free workplace for workers. So in South Africa, yes, indeed, I think it's suitable for South Africa. In actual fact, we've just negotiated a code of good practice on the prevention and elimination of violence in the workplace, which realigned a new code in March this year. It was gazetted, which replaces the old code on the code on sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, this also touches on many of the other laws that the government has to also domesticate to accommodate Convention 190. So in that sense, already government, together with labour and the private sector, have put together this code. So all three parties are then obligated to ensure the implementation of this code. And in that way, we will be able to ensure and it rests with the trade unions to actually ensure that the code is actually implemented at the workplace by employers having policies and procedures in place that is aligned to the new code of good practice.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed, we have to do a lot of work to ensure that we start addressing sexual harassment and all forms of harassment and violence, including violence in the workplace. And employers and government both have to ensure that it is implemented.
Sure.
But
And I just want to pick up on that, Patricia, with Khomotso. Is the Basic Conditions of Employment Act in its current framework aligned to C190? Does South Africa's labour laws contemplate C190? Has it been ratified to the point where it's implemented in policy?
The convention, as we earlier indicated, that it has been ratified. It means that all our laws, particularly the labor laws, need to be aligned with Convention 190 so that it can then become easy for employers to implement it. At the current moment, it is still a process that the Department of Labor is still embarking on, because it is their responsibility to make sure that it becomes part of the legislative prescripts and for the employers to make sure that they implement it.
And on that point, I suppose, Crescentia, the test is whether employers have the commitment to implement, and not just implement in actual operational policy, but implement to the point that if gender-based violence is so noted or registered or experienced in the workplace, do you think the framework is there, that process is actually followed to deal with them?
Well, I think it's a good question. In a unionized entity, where there are negotiations and collective bargaining negotiated, and in the past, Patricia knows that we've negotiated in our CBAs the inclusion of an environment free of sexual harassment. But what it means is that we need to now look at our policy. In the case of South Africa, Mauritius, Namibia, Somalia, who have ratified this convention, to look at those collective bargaining and see if they're, and align it to the current conventions, and make sure that, because we know even government, we must, as trade unionists, ensure that the laws are aligned, the laws are implemented. We know employers are dodgy, and we must ensure that as a unionist, we inform ourselves on the current convention, but also we ensure that the policies are aligned and ensure that they are implemented.
Yeah. Patricia, before I go for a break, let me just quickly understand that if so, a case of gender-based violence, be it sexual, be it a power struggle, be it actual physical violence and experience in the workplace, is there any evidence to claim that these matters are fully dealt with, that it deals with that which happens in the workplace and the necessary disciplinary processes that need to take place, and then of course they follow up with the South African Police Services and the courts to see the matter through completely? Of course, these are different circumstances that we need to look at, but do you know whether there's evidence to suggest that we actually have employers following through and trying to deal with GBV in the workplace?
Well, I'm going to talk according to my own experiences dealing with sexual harassment and gender-based violence directly with our members. Yes, I think from employer side, it's always a struggle to ensure that they follow their own procedures. And that is where the union comes in, ensuring that, the due processes are followed. And we've had many cases. For example, we've had sexual harassment cases that were, in actual fact, sexual assault and rape. And we've dealt with it following due process and have taken it to the CCMA. But at the same time, we've also referred the matter to the police, taken out protection orders against the perpetrator, having that protection order served to the perpetrator at the workplace, and also seeing the matter through. Now, it's not all the cases that go through the process, like getting to court, and that is also a process on itself. At the current moment, we have one member who was killed by her husband, and we've got a campaign that we picket at all the court appearances. We've got another member who was sexually harassed by her manager, and we also referred the matter to the police, and currently the matter is also at the court, and she's also, in actual fact, her case is appearing on the 29th of this month, and that is also a process that we are supporting our members. Now, not all employers, including the perpetrator, follow the process, and they would always interrupt, like intimidating, victimization, etc. So, as a union, we try to support the victim all the way, whichever process at the company level, and actually also at the criminal, as a criminal.
And I want to pick up on that particular scenario that you painted for us, and thank you very much for that. What exactly happens in the case when there is an allegation made, but it's subject to other investigations? Does the employer still hold on to the alleged perpetrator? We'll pick up on that after the break. Michaela Miller, of course, standing by with this week's Labour News as well.
Welcome to you. I'm Michaela Miller. Thanks for joining us. The SA Post Office plans to retrench employees due to its financial losses for 15 years. The state-owned company has been forced to operate without financial input from the government. The Post Office launched a two-phase approach to retrenchments aimed at reducing costs, like the company's salary bill, which accounts for 61% of its total expenditure. The Post Office spokesperson said a formal retrenchment process has not yet started and that the company is still consulting with trade unions, employees, and the government, the Post Office's sole shareholder. The South African Cane Growers Association reported that sugarcane company Tongaat Hewlett has finally paid small-scale farmers. Now, this comes after the company missed its end of October deadline to pay the farmers for a sugarcane delivery made in September after it declared financial distress. SA Cane Growers Association's Andrew Russell said the payment was critical given the particular financial vulnerability of small-scale growers. The Public Service Association started their strike this week over wages and conditions of employment in the public sector. A memorandum of demands is to be handed over to government officials that includes a 6% wage increase and the continuation of 1,000 Rand cash allowance. PSA Assistant General Manager Ruben Maleka said the strike was in line with the Section 69 of the Labour Relations Act, which empowers the union to down tools once their strike and picketing rules have been finalised. He said the PSA's strike would remain a full-blown shutdown regardless of the consequences. Giant social media company Twitter stated recently that the firm is reorganizing its operation as a result of a need to reduce costs. This has meant that the layoff of about a half of Twitter staff, over 4,000 employees, including nearly all those working at its office in Accra, Ghana. This comes soon after Twitter announced in April 2021 that it was opening its first Africa office in Accra, Ghana, in a bid to more immersed and the rich and vibrant communities that drive the conversations taking place every day across the Africa continent. Twitter's cost-cutting exercise came about because of the new US billionaire owner Elon Musk's drive to make Twitter more profitable. And lastly, riot police used tear gas to disperse protesters in Peru's capital, Lima, as thousands of people took part in the anti-government marches across the country. Demonstrators want embattled President Pedro Castillo to resign over allegations of corruption. Peru faces a number of economic problems, including spiraling living costs. The country was disproportionately badly hit by COVID-19, and the poverty levels are forecast to remain above pre-pandemic levels for the next 2 years, according to the World Bank. Well, that's a wrap from my side. You can share your thoughts or story with us by sending an email to labor@wwmp.org.za. Over to Tashreeq to continue this week's topic of discussion.
All right, thanks there, Michaela. Now, the problem that we sit with, and I want to pick up on this, Khomotso, very quickly, because one of the important things that Patricia mentioned earlier is the fact that there's a process and things need to happen. And so how do we deal with gender-based violence when, we have such a poor record in this country by the police services and the law enforcement officials to actually begin to investigate and prosecute certain cases? And are those processes dependent on what happens inside the workplace?
These processes are not just dependent on the workplaces, because at the end of the day, you don't get what you need from the employer, because most of the time the perpetrator will still be within the workplace. And we've been advocating that as and when a sexual harassment case is reported, an investigation ensues, a perpetrator must then be put on suspension with immediate effect. And in most instances, that does not actually happen. Now, what we need to do as labor unions is to make sure that our campaigns are actually fostering that to happen, so that the person who has reported the matter or the person that we are assisting is able to actually work and also receive the assistance that they actually require from the side of the employer. But in most instances, the perpetrators are not actually, taken out to make sure that the environment becomes conducive for the individual who has actually reported the matter.
Yeah, which I suppose is further complicated, Crescentia, by the fact that the gender balance in the workplace is often skewed towards men, and when allegations of gender-based violence would be made, it's sometimes very difficult for men to, first of all, be able to comprehend and then show solidarity and follow the necessary process. Do you think the gender balance impacts the manner in which we implement something like C190?
I believe that because now, irrespective of the fact that it is majority is women who are affected by gender-based violence, and of course, as we said in our conversation, that C190 is now broadening this scope of dealing with the issues of harassment in the workplace. It means that everyone, irrespective of your gender, must be trained, must be educated. There are mechanisms that we put in place to ensure that we create awareness in the workplace, and the obligation is on the employer in the workplace to ensure that there is pamphlets talking about gender-based violence, and also distancing themselves on it, and ensure that and also putting in place what mechanisms will be looked at. I was really thinking about that. I think we need also committees in the workplace that deals with the issues of gender-based violence. I work in the male-dominated sector anyway. The building, construction, wood and forest sectors are male-dominated sectors. And we ensure that affiliates really demand that the workplace is free of harassment, and make sure that whether it is male-dominated or female-dominated, there is a committee that deals with the issues of harassment and discrimination as well in the world of work.
Yeah, I want to put that same question to you, Patricia, and whether whether instances of gender-based violence look differently in different work circumstances and sectors in particular, whether the farm worker sector is a lot more exposed to gender-based violence than what maybe the steel worker sector. Does it matter from sector to sector? Have you noticed anything?
Well, women are generally vulnerable to sexual harassment across the sectors, as we have said that gender-based violence is a worldwide phenomenon. But you will find that if it is a female-dominated sector, that because it is female-dominated, there's higher numbers of women in that sector. So therefore, the number of women that are vulnerable to sexual harassment will obviously increase. But if you look at the male-dominated sector, where there are fewer women, the numbers would be obviously fewer, but it will still be prevalent in the workplace of these women being harassed. So it's a question of numbers. So all women are vulnerable, but there are sectors that are extra, they are extra vulnerable, increased vulnerability because of their socio-economic position. Like, for example, domestic workers work in a home which is isolated, and it works for one. You can't go into that home. Farm workers as well. It is owned by the farmers, and you can't access the farms. So it's very difficult for unions, for example, or for anybody to go and assist these workers, especially the women workers. Although the convention itself covers farm workers and covers domestic workers, but the circumstances, the situation that they find themselves in, make it extremely difficult to access justice as well. And the same goes for the unions that actually organize in those sectors. They have to go the extra mile to actually deal with harassment and violence in those sectors.
Yeah, and I think that is very crucial to understand, and thanks so very much for highlighting that. But once I return, I want to talk about how gender no longer is a black and white thing. It's no longer just men and female. There's a lot of other colors in between, and how do we begin to orientize ourselves just with that? And so we'll pick up on that after the break. Do stay with us. All right, gender about 10 years ago was a purely male and female thing. These days, of course, we are increasingly becoming orientated with a different social structure, and one that increasingly sees people that do identify differently also at the receiving end of cases of gender-based violence. And I want to pick up on that now, and maybe start with you, Crescentia. The fact that, of course, there are people that are non-binary, people that identify differently. Do you think that the workplace has adopted to make it comfortable, inclusive for persons like that?
Well, it is difficult. It is difficult in every environment, really to find a workplace sometimes that ensures that everyone is treated equally and they are not discriminated because of the selection they want to become or they want to be identified with. But I think unions are beginning to really recognize that this phenomenon is also included in the issues around harassment, bullying, victimization of people of from either gays and lesbians. We just came from a Congress of BWI where we adopted a resolution to make sure that everybody is equal. We must respect the choices of people, whether how they want to be associated, how they want to be received, and that we as unionists, it's our duty to ensure that everyone is treated equally. Even really, I know that Patricia talks about the majority of women are harassed. Even in a male-dominated sector, you find that men are being brutally harassed, they are raped, they are maimed because of the way the choices they have made. And this is where we as unionists must ensure that policies are really protecting everyone, irrespective whether you are male or female or both.
Yeah, is this a prevalent issue, Patricia? That companies and workplaces have not officially begun to look at matters of gender and sex differently, and whether they too are particular victims of gender-based violence.
Yes, I think, it's been a long time since we've had the Constitution of South Africa, and even the Employment Equity Act talks about same-sex orientation. But that was ages ago, years ago, and it's only now that we start recognizing, amongst employers, start recognizing that the LGBTI community also needs, workers also need to protect it. So there's a slow uptake amongst employers to actually start addressing and creating an equal workplace where everybody is accepted irrespective of their gender identity or their sex, sexual orientation. So there's a slow uptake on that. But we as trade unionists have tried to include it into our collective bargaining agenda, ensuring that workers are, LGBTIQ workers are protected. Well, in my own experience, in my union, we have dealt with cases of sexual harassment and discrimination against some of our members who have come out and is outspoken about it. And we've won one case at the CCMA, for example, and the employer had to compensate the worker, the member, a monetary compensation as well, and also having training sessions for the whole company for workers to understand diversity and also inclusive of sexual harassment, and also being able, also educating them about treating everybody equal in the workplace, and that such actions against LGBTIQ members won't be tolerated.
And same question to you, Khomotso. Do you think that if we look at the situation as it stands right now, it does call for gender-based violence that isn't just purely a male and female scenario, and of course there's the element of sex as well that comes in there, and how one so self-identifies. Do you think that the workplace needs to become and get on with, as Patricia said, we have a constitution that has allowed for this for such a long time, and for it to still remain a big concern is surely an indictment. How do you see it?
I think I want to agree with Patricia in terms of, encompassing and making sure that all workers are actually treated equally. We don't have to separate workers because of their different choices of sex and gender. So in different workplaces, people need to be treated equally and with respect. And we should not actually start, separating, as I earlier indicated, workers because of the choice they have made. So I think the workplaces needs to start swiftly, making sure that they bring these laws into practice and make sure that they encompass and include all the workers and protect all workers.
All workers is the concluding remarks there of Khomotso Makupola. Thank you very much to all of you for certainly having joined us here. And so the test of this is certainly going to be implementation and adherence, because a policy written on a piece of paper is but just that, a policy, a platitude with very little determination to actually implement it. And even the bigger challenge, I suppose, would be how do we fix a society and begin to have a society that looks at matters of gender-based violence in one that is defined by the dignity of the worker and the dignity of every person, however they wish to identify. And so for that, we deal with a complex set of problems, both from society to even the workplace. And something that we've discussed in this program here is that surely what happens in the workplace is as much a microcosm of what happens in society. And on that note, we shall leave it here. Thank you so very much for having joined us once again, and we shall chat again. Bye-bye.